currently, as it is, our list works in terms of all of the basic functionality. We're able to add new items, we're able to delete items, and we're able to look at all of the items in our list. But there's one feature or one functionality that I would love to have for this app that we haven't currently implemented. And it's the ability to have multiple lists, right? There's no fun just having a single list to work off. So what if we were able to, instead of going to the home page, which is our default list, what if we were able to just write /work and head over to the work list and be able to see the items there? And what if we could create new lists on the fly? Like I wanted to create a home list. So if I type in the web address /home, then I wanted to create a brand new page without me having to define all of the get and the post routes. We can use what we learned about Express route parameters to do this. Express allows us to use route parameters to create dynamic routes. And so as a challenge, I want you to delete this get route and instead create a dynamic route based on the route parameters, so that if I go to localhost 3000 / say home or / work, I should be able to print this last part of the URL inside the app.get. Again, as a reminder, this is what Express route parameters look like. We have a colon, and then we have a parameter name, and then inside the callback, we get to access request.params.that parameter name. And this will equal the value that the user has typed in here. Pause the video and try to complete this challenge. So let's begin by creating our route. Maybe we'll create it just after the app.get up here. So I'm going to write app.get, and instead of providing a hard-coded route like /work or /home, I'm just going to write /, and then I'm going to call it custom list name. And this is going to, again, accept a callback, request and response. And then inside my callback, I'm going to log request.params.custom list name. So now let's hit save and go into our browser. And I'm going to try and run this again, localhost 3000 / home. And now if I go into my console, you can see I now have that part at the end here logged in my console. So I could change that to say work. And if I go ahead and hit enter, then you can see I now get work logged in here. So far, so good. Now, instead of logging that param, let's go ahead and save it into a constant, and let's call it custom list name. So custom list name equals request.params.custom list name, and that comes from whatever it is that the user enters after the /. Now that we have access to the name of the new list, well, we're going to use it to create a new document. And that document is going to have a slightly different schema than what our items had. So right below where we have our default items, I'm going to create a new schema, and this one is going to be called list schema. And this is going to take two fields. One is the name of the list, which will be a string, and the second is going to be an array of items. So the name of the field is going to be items, and the value of the field is going to be an array of item schema based items. So now what we're saying is for every new list that we create, the list is going to have a name, and it's going to have an array of item documents associated with it as well. The next thing to do, as always, is to create our Mongoose model. This is going to be constant called list, and it's going to be equal to mongoose.model, and then we're going to specify the singular version of our collection, which is going to be called a list. and we're going to specify the schema, which is list schema. And make sure that you haven't got any typos like I have here, mongoose.mode, which should be mongoose.model. So now that we've created our list model from our list schema, then we're ready to create new list documents based off this model. And we're going to do that when a user tries to access a custom list name. Inside this route, I'm going to create a new list, and this is going to be created based off our list model. And I have to fill in the two fields. One is the name of the list, which is simply going to be whatever the user typed into the route. So if they said /work or /home, then that's going to be the list name. So I'm going to put custom list name here. And then the second field is going to be the items. And this should accept an array of list items. And so when we create a new list that is a custom list, we're going to give it the name based off the path that the user tried to access. And then for the items, we're simply going to start off with the same default items as we created previously. So previously, when we made our default list, we created 3 item documents and we packaged them all into an array. So we can now reuse this array to populate our custom lists. So inside here, the items for my new list are simply going to be the default items. Now that we've created our new list document, then all we have to do is call list.save to save that into the lists collection. Now if we save our app.js and we head over to our browser and we try to access, for example, localhost 3000 / home, and we hit enter, then if we go into our Mongo shell and we just say show collections, then you can see we now have a new collection. And that collection is a collection of lists. So let's say db.lists.find. And you can see that we have a single document inside our lists collection, which has the name of home, which corresponds to this part that we entered using the route parameters. And then it has an array of items, which correspond to our default items. Welcome to your to-do list, hit the plus button, and then hit this to delete the item. So far, so good. That was pretty successful. Now, here's a problem. When a user accesses localhost or whatever the website domain will be /home, then we'll create a new list with that name, home, right? But we don't really want a whole bunch of them. What if a user's already created the list and they simply want to access it? So for example, if I head back over here and we stop this and try to head over to home again, then if we check our Mongo shell and we try to run db.list.find, then you can see we now actually have 2 lists, both called home, right? So this is not what we want. We don't want to create a new list with the same name every time the user tries to access it. How can we solve this with code? Well, we have to check to see if a list with that name already exists in our collection of lists. And if it does, then we're just going to display it. But if it doesn't, then we'll create a new one using the default items. So as a challenge, I want you to use the Mongoose method called find_one to find within our lists collection whether if there's a list that has the same name as the one that the user is currently trying to access. And if there is, then we're just going to log exists. And if it doesn't exist, then we'll log doesn't exist. So pause the video and try to complete that challenge. All right, so just above where we create our lists, we're going to call find_one on our list model. And the condition we're going to give it is find me a list inside the collection of lists that has the name that's the same as the one that the user is currently trying to access. So custom list name. And once you've completed that, then we'll have the callback function with error and found list. So that means if there was an error, then it'll print it, but if there wasn't, then we should be able to tap into what was found. So we can say if there were no errors, then in that case, we're going to check to see if there is or there isn't a found list. Now, it's important to differentiate between find one and the one that we used previously, which is find all, essentially, because this method is going to give us an array back as the result. And that's why we had to check to see if the array had a length of 0, namely, it had no items in it. It was an empty array. But in this case, what we get is an object back, because we're saying find one. So you should only return one document if it is found. So we can't check its length, but instead we can simply check to see if it exists or not, right? If found list doesn't exist, well, then in that case, we'll log doesn't exist. But otherwise, then we'll log exists. Now let's give that a go, and let's go into our website, and we try to access localhost/home. Let's hit enter and see what we get in our console. So let's switch back to this tab, and it says exists. But what if we tried some sort of new one that we've obviously not made yet? Let's hit enter, and doesn't exist. Great. So our code seems to be working. So now, instead of console logging, we're going to go ahead and implement the code that we need. Here, I'm going to write a comment saying this should be the path where we create a new list. And down here, instead of this console log, I'm going to have a comment that says this is a path where we should show an existing list. So if there were no lists that were found that had the same name, then we're going to create a new list. And the part of our code which does that is, of course, this section. So we'll just cut that and paste it into the if. And then we have the else statement. So show an existing list if it already exists. Here, we're going to use that found list that we tapped into. And we've already checked that it's definitely not nil, it definitely exists. So what we can do is we can call res.render, and we're going to render our list.ejs. And then the second parameter we're going to pass in is going to be the list title and also the items. So let's just copy that in here. Now, the list title is no longer going to be a static word like today. Instead, it's going to be the custom list name, right? So we could tap into this found list, and we can say dot name to tap into its name field. And for the items, we do something quite similar. We say found list dot items. And so now we'll tap into the name property and the items property, and we'll send that over to list.ejs to populate that page. So now let's hit save, and let's head back into our localhost 3000, which still works as it should. And this one, of course, has the default list with the static name of today. But let's go ahead and access our home list. So we've now got a home list. And what if we try to create a new one, say a work list? Well, it seems like the list got created because if we check in our Mongo shell, then you can see there's a whole bunch of stuff that got created. But the last document that we added was this one with a name of work. If you wanted to clear out a particular collection because it's kind of gathering dust and it's got data from previous testing, then all you have to do is to make sure that you're inside the correct database. So I'm using TodoList DB. And then here we can show collections. So we've got items and lists, and I can say db.lists.drop. And this will wipe out my lists collection so that if I say show collections again, lists no longer exist. Let's head back to our web page and access home again. So that should now be created inside here. And show collections should now list list, and db.lists.find should now list a single document with name of home. And if I change that to work and hit enter, then now I should have two documents, one called home and one called work. But why are they not automatically showing up in here? Well, when we create a new list, we fall into this if block. And all we do at the end of it is we just call list.save, and then we're done with it. We're leaving the user hanging, right? So we're going to use our neat trick of using res.redirect, and we're going to redirect back to the current route, which, remember, is not just the root route, but it's / the custom list name. But luckily, we already have access to that inside this if statement. So we can say redirect to / and then we're going to concatenate the custom list name. Now, if we head back into our website and we try to create a new list, say school, and hit enter, you can see we get redirected to that route, and we've now got our list showing up here.